This year, when Alabama and Georgia met in the SEC championship game, the Tide's passing game looked unstoppable. Quarterback Bryce Young threw for 421 yards, 3 touchdowns and 0 interceptions, and probably locked up the Heisman Trophy in the process, avoiding pressure, making all the right reads and throws, and hitting on a number of explosive plays on the way to a 41-point showing against one of the best defenses in the country. When these two teams met again in the national championship, though, things changed. Now, they didn't change as drastically as you might expect. Young still threw for 369 yards, and his completion percentage actually got better. What did change, though, were the explosive plays, the points that came off of them, as well as 2 interceptions for the Bulldogs. At the end of the game, this all left Alabama with just 18 points, and the Georgia Bulldogs had their first national championship in more than 4 decades. In this video, we'll look at some of the defensive adjustments that made it all happen. When you're talking about adjustments in a football game plan, it's important to remember that it's never just one thing. When Georgia's defense was making adjustments for the national championship, they were thinking about a ton of different situations. There's a game plan for when Alabama has 2 tight ends in the game. There's a game plan for when they have 1 tight end in the game, a game plan for when they put 3 receivers to the same side, and so on. So every matchup in football really breaks down into a bunch of different, smaller matchups. Talking about all of these would take hours, so in this video we're going to focus on one critical one. In both games, Alabama loved to get into bunch sets. We're seeing one of these here, so I'm talking about formations where the Tide put 3 receiving threats in tight to each other, with the middle threat, or the point man in the bunch, lined up on the line of scrimmage, with 2 receivers off the ball to the inside and outside of him. This kind of formation is a mainstay of the Alabama offense, and by my count, they either lined up in or motioned into a bunch almost 40 times across these 2 games. This is a key formation in their base run game, where they use it to run a lot of RPOs. And in the SEC championship game, it also generated some of their biggest plays in the passing game. So if you're looking to choose one of those smaller matchups that I just talked about to study, this is the place to start. There are a million different ways to play coverage in football, and there are a bunch of different ways to defend bunch sets specifically, but fundamentally, football is all about numbers, leverage, and assignment. Those are the 3 things that a defensive coordinator can mess with if he's trying to shut down something that the offense is running. And we'll talk a little bit about all of them in the national championship game in this video. To start with numbers, throughout this video I'm going to refer a lot to coverage structures that play 3 over 3 to the bunch, and to coverage structures that play 4 over 3 to the bunch, and these are exactly what they sound like. In this image, Alabama's got a bunch set with 3 receivers up at the top of the screen, and Georgia's lining up with 3 defenders over them. When I say that Georgia's playing 3 over 3, this is all that I mean. On this play, we're seeing a 4 over 3 structure. Alabama's got that same 3 receiver bunch at the top of the screen, but now the Bulldogs are lining up with kind of a 4 defender diamond over them. Now, it's probably not surprising that Georgia's use of these 2 types of structure was closely connected to their pressure strategy. If you don't blitz, then you have extra defenders in coverage, and so it's easier to get into 4 over 3 structures like this one. When you do blitz, you're typically going to lose that extra defender in coverage, and so you'll have to play more 3 over 3 structures. With these concepts in mind, let's look back at one of Alabama's big plays that I broke down in my video on the SEC championship game, which I'll link in the description down below. On this play, the Bulldogs are blitzing this linebacker down here at the bottom of the screen, and as I just said, when they blitzed, they typically played 3 over 3 to the bunch, and that's what we see up at the top of the screen, with 3 defenders playing a kind of zone triangle around those 3 receivers. So here, we see that the cornerback's playing outside, the nickelback's playing inside, and the safety's playing over the top. In my last video, we saw that Bama took advantage of this by running a shallow cross with one of the receivers from the bunch. Even though the Dogs are blitzing, they still have this second linebacker in the middle of the field to pick up this route, and so Georgia's coverage triangle is going to let that route go and pass him off to that linebacker. So far, so good, but with that linebacker occupied by the shallow cross, the Tide are then going to go after the nickelback. He's the only remaining inside defender in that 3 over 3 coverage triangle, and so Alabama's going to attack him by running 2 inside routes at different levels. One's going to attack to the inside behind him, and the other's going to attack to the inside underneath of him. On this play, that defender's going to jump up to take that shallower route, and so the quarterback's going to be able to hit the deeper threat behind him for a huge play. Now, to return to numbers one more time, we can think of the basic problem here like this. To properly defend this combination of routes, Georgia would need 1 defender to cover the shallow cross, and then 2 inside defenders to cover the high-low combination. The Bulldogs only have 1 inside defender though, and so this turns into a big play for the Tide. So how did the Bulldogs stop this from happening in the national championship? We'll see a few different things that they did, but one solution was just not to blitz. As I said earlier, when the Bulldogs didn't blitz, it freed them up to play 4 over 3 to the bunch, and that's what we're going to see on this play. On the last play, we saw that this linebacker away from the bunch was blitzing, but this time that guy's going to stay in coverage, and against the route combination that we just saw, that means that he'll be in position to defend the shallow cross. When he can pick up that route, it frees up the linebacker next to him to move out to the bunch, putting Georgia in one of those 4-over-3 structures that I've been talking about. Now, when Alabama runs that high-low stretch, that linebacker can defend the shallower route, and the safety behind him can take away the deeper route. The cornerback and nickelback then plays deep and shallow defenders to the outside, and Georgia's going to be able to lock down this concept from all sides. We can see this at work if we run the play forward a little bit. Here we see that the underneath receivers are completely shut down with defenders inside, outside, and in between them. We can't see it on screen right now, but we also know that this receiver running vertical is going to be bracketed by the cornerback and the safety deep. There's not going to be anything open here, and so the quarterback has to throw a check down to the running back on the opposite side. On this play, that happens to get just enough yards for the first down, but this coverage adjustment is the difference between a 3-yard gain in the national championship versus a 67-yard touchdown in the SEC title game. Of course, if you've watched any film on Georgia's defense, then you know that Kirby Smart doesn't want to drop into coverage with a vanilla pass rush, and in the national championship, the Bulldogs had some pressures that did a nice job of affecting Young at quarterback. For example, on this play, they're putting 3 potential rushers up on the line of scrimmage toward the left side of the offense's formation. That gives this side more immediate rush threats than the other side, where Georgia's only got 2 first-level defenders threatening to rush. Now, to understand the Bulldogs' game plan here, we really have to look at what Alabama's doing in pass protection when they see this alignment. Here, they're going to end up in what's called a half-slide protection. That means, among other things, that after the snap, if we keep an eye on the center right here, we'll see him sliding to the left, which lets him give help to the left tackle and left guard, and this gives Alabama 3 offensive linemen to match the 3 immediate rush threats that Georgia's showing to this side. This is a half-slide protection, though, and so when the center slides to the left like this, that's going to put the opposite side of the line in man protection. Those guys know that they won't be getting any help from the center, and so they have to block their rushers straight up. This is also called a big-on-big protection because in it, the big offensive linemen, the right guard and the right tackle, are going to block the big first-level defenders, Georgia's edge rusher and the interior lineman to the inside of him. The running back, then, is going to work across to this man side to pick up this linebacker if he blitzes. So we can say that this protection has a slide side, where the left tackle and left guard will be getting help from the center, and a man side, where each blocker is responsible for his guy man-to-man. Unfortunately for the Tide, Georgia's one step ahead of them here. When the Bulldogs line up with 3 immediate threats to the left like this, they are trying to manipulate Alabama into sliding to that side because they are going to attack back to the opposite side, to that man side of the protection. Remember that to that side, the right guard and right tackle are responsible for blocking the 2 first-level defenders. Well, after the snap, Georgia's interior lineman here is going to stunt outside. The right guard's responsible for blocking him, and so when that guy works out, the right guard has to follow him. The linebacker here is then going to blitz, and when he does that, who's responsible for picking him up? That's right, it's the running back, and here we see him working across the formation to pick up that block. Now comes the fun part if you're a Georgia fan. At this point, all of Bama's blockers to the man side are occupied, and so Georgia's just going to introduce one more rusher than they can block to that side. This is a lot like what I talked about in my video on the Clemson game, and you can check that out more in the description down below. To get an extra rusher to this side of the formation, Georgia's going to take this rusher from the slide side, that left side of the formation, and they are going to loop him across the formation to attack the man side. After the snap, we see that as he starts to work across, the running back is occupied with his blitzer, and the right guard is watching the first-level defenders that he's responsible for. This means that when that defender loops across to this side, there won't be a blocker left to pick him up, and he'll get a free run at the quarterback. This wasn't a completely new strategy from Georgia in the national championship game, but by my count, the Bulldogs ran it about twice as often as they did in the SEC championship, and it did a lot to get their defense off the field in some key situations. Now, if you're Georgia, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. If you want to bring extra defenders to create cool pressures like this, then you are probably going to have to take guys out of coverage. This means that you'll have to play more of those 3-over-3 structures, but in the SEC championship game, those were the structures that got you killed. If you want to blitz, you're committed to playing 3-over-3, so you don't have the option to change numbers, and so what you'll need to do is find ways to change up the leverage and the assignments that your 3 defenders are playing within coverage. Georgia has a bunch of different ways to do this, but in the SEC championship game, the solutions that they went with obviously didn't work. We've already seen the 3-over-3 zone triangle, for example, and we know how that ended. Here's another play that I broke down in my video of the SEC championship. There's no triangle here. This is just a man coverage with a free safety playing as a help player in the deep middle of the field. In this coverage, the Dogs are going to take their cornerback and play him in lock man on the outside receiver. As we know, in Alabama's favorite concept, that guy's going to run a shallow cross, and so the cornerback's going to be responsible for covering that route all the way. The nickelback and the roll down safety will then be responsible for the other two receivers, and in most cases, Georgia's going to ask the nickelback to defend the first outside threat. On this play, the inside receiver in the bunch is going to threaten him by releasing outside toward the flat, and so that'll be the guy that the nickelback takes. The rolled down safety then is going to be responsible for whoever's left, and in this concept, that'll be the point man in the bunch who's running a 7-step slant to attack the middle of the field. On this play, that safety is going to get burned by this route, and this is all going to come down to his leverage. Remember that the cornerback here is in man coverage on the shallow cross, and so the safety has no guarantee of outside help from that guy. Because of this, when his receiver starts to threaten him vertically, he's going to overplay that receiver to the outside. Remember, he's got safety help in the deep middle of the field, and so he wants to take away the sidelines and force everything back inside toward his help player. Unfortunately for him, his outside leverage here is going to let his receiver beat him back to the inside toward the middle of the field. That receiver's route is also going to break off underneath before it gets all the way up to the deep middle safety, and so this is going to turn into another big play for the Tide. Here we'll see how Georgia was able to run a different kind of 3-over-3 coverage in the national championship game. Again, we've got Alabama in a bunch up at the top of the screen, and Georgia is again playing 3-over-3, but the assignments in this coverage are going to be different. On the last play, we saw that the nickelback here was responsible for defending the first outside threat to the flat. Well, this time, he's instead going to take the first receiver inside. We can't see it from this shot, but there's a safety lurking off screen here just outside the hash, and so the nickelback is going to defend the first inside route. He's going to defend it with outside leverage, and he's going to funnel his receiver toward that safety on the opposite side of the field. When the nickelback takes the first inside threat like this, the cornerback and the safety are then going to be free to play an inside-outside bracket on the two remaining receivers. Now remember that last time, the safety here got burned, and that was because he had to overplay his receiver to the outside to take away the sidelines. Well, in this bracket, the cornerback's guaranteed to be outside of him, and so that's going to allow the safety to play with inside leverage on his receiver. As we run this forward a little bit, we see that the outside receiver is broken out into the flat, and so the cornerback, as the outside man in the bracket, is going to sit there ready to break on it if the quarterback commits to the throw. Meanwhile, the point man in the bunch is released down the hash, and here we can see that with the cornerback defending the outside, the safety is able to play inside of that vertical route. On this play, that receiver is again going to attack the middle of the field, but this time that safety's inside leverage is going to put him in perfect position to make a play on the ball, getting a key pass breakup on 3rd and 8. The real magic in this game plan, though, came from being able to succeed both in 4-over-3 and in 3-over-3 structures, because then the Bulldogs had the ability to jump back and forth between them, disguising what they were going to do. On this play, Georgia showing pressure from both linebackers before the snap, and so it looks like they're going to be playing one of those 3-over-3 coverage structures to the bunch. After the snap, though, both of those linebackers are going to bail out, and this is going to put the Bulldogs into a de facto 4-over-3 coverage-oriented look that takes away the middle of the field. On top of this, what we can see right here is that Georgia has a completely free rusher coming unblocked off the edge. So how on earth did that happen? To understand this, think back to what we said about Alabama's half-slide protection, where the Tide were sliding in one direction with the center and then playing man to the backside. On this play, we're going to see the center slide to the left, and the idea here is that if everybody who's showing blitz comes, they want to use the center to give help to the left side of the line. They're doing this because they've got those 3 bunch receivers to the right side of the formation, and the protection and the passing concept are coordinated. They figure that if everybody blitzes to the right side of the field, then one of those 3 receivers should be able to get open over the middle on a hot route. The real key here, though, is that when the center slides to the left, it leaves the right guard and right tackle playing 2-on-3 versus the 3 Bulldogs showing pressure. In this situation, it'll be up to those blockers to pick up the 2 inside-most threats. Those will be the guys with the quickest path to the quarterback, and so if you have to choose, the idea is that you want to pick those guys up with your offensive line. It'll then be up to the quarterback to throw hot off of the outside rusher. This all means that after the snap, if you're the right tackle right here, you need to work down to the inside. The right guard's going to be occupied by the interior lineman that's over him, and so the right tackle has to pick up that blitzing linebacker. As we know, though, after showing pressure at first, that linebacker is going to bail out to play coverage, and when this happens, the right tackle is stuck in the middle of the formation, blocking nobody, and meanwhile the defensive end's coming unblocked off the edge. Ideally, when the quarterback sees this, he'd look to throw hot off of one of his receivers over the middle, but with the linebackers dropping out into coverage, that option's not going to be there. Because of this, the quarterback has to avoid that unblocked rusher, scramble out to his right, and make a contested throw downfield for an incompletion. This is a classic case of how Georgia's 4- and 3-man coverage concepts over the bunch were able to work together to take away the big plays from the SEC championship, to keep their defense unpredictable, and to bring home a national championship to Georgia. Alright, that's it for this video. Keep checking back throughout the offseason where I'll be doing profiles on the best coordinators from the 2021 season, as well as some historical offenses and defenses that have been massively influential. I'll see you here next time.